Aegean world. The Aegean world, as we can see by the map here, is we're going to look at a lot of these islands that are in the Aegean Sea. We're going to look at Crete, the island of Crete, where we believe Knossos was, Knossos. We're also going to look at the Cyclades Islands, where we see some Cycladic art. Then we're going to focus also on mainland Greece and where Mycenae was. So this is what we're going to focus on in this section. Let's go ahead and get into it and look at some of the artwork that came out of this era. We're going to start around the Bronze Age. We're going to, like I said, look at the Cycladic art, Minoan art, and the Mycenaean art. This is, if you've ever had to read the Iliad for any sort of world literature class, this is where a lot of it takes place with the it's talking about the battle against Troy. We can see Troy there on the map, and the Iliad and also the Odyssey does mention a lot of the places that we're going to talk about here today. We're also going to look at a couple of discoveries by a couple of different famous archaeologist, Schliemann, who discovered Mycenae and the things that happened there, and also Arthur Evans, who is one of the guys who discovered Knossos. So let's check it out here. We're first going to look at some Cycladic art. At least this is art from the Cyclades Islands. We don't find a lot of big temples or anything like that there, but we do find some remnants of civilization. And one of the things that we find a lot prevalently are these figures, these mobiliary figures. These figures are, they look sort of primitive compared to the ancient Egyptian artwork that we looked at before, which was a lot more naturalistic than this is. These are a lot more geometric and abstract than we see the Egyptians, and almost modern. When I look at them, it looks like modern art to me, just because of that simplification of form and everything else. We see that they have their arms crossed. Usually these figures are female. We can see the breasts and also sort of the pubic region that is sort of exaggerated there. And so we do believe that most of these were female. And if we look at the feet on these were not meant to be standing up. The feet are kind of pointed downwards, and so you couldn't make this figure stand if you wanted to. It looks like they were probably designed to lay down. So we think that they were probably, maybe a reference to a person and buried with a person, and it shows sort of a figure in a reclining or a burial pose, and that also might have something to do with why the arms are crossed like that. Other than just making the arms like that, you're not going to get them knocked off when you're making a sculpture. But we do believe that probably that whole the figure, the way that they're made, is made to look like they're laying in a tomb or in a grave. And so we think that these probably had something to do with females. And anytime we see any art that has to do with females, then we also have to automatically assume fertility, it seems like. So these are some examples of those. We do see some male figures from the Cycladic, but usually if it's a male, they're usually doing something, like in the case of these. These are some seated harp players, and it shows people actually doing something, or in this case, performing on a harp. These are kind of interesting too. We do see that same sort of geometric style, a little more modeling and naturalism maybe in the arms, and also I kind of appreciate the furniture. We do get a kind of a look into what their furniture even looked like. If we look at the one on the right, we see that sort of decorate, how the furniture was built. It almost looks like a pie symbol that he's sitting on there. So kind of interesting when it comes to the furniture there as well. And also another thing that we see here, we find all of these unusual things that they used to call frying pans. These were made out of clay. They were usually dark, maybe fired into this sort of dark color. And in this case, we see it looks like, and once again, sort of geometric and abstract, a ship with oars extended from it in an ocean, and that ocean looks like it has a lot of choppy waves. All those spirals and sort of triangular shapes or represent sort of waves. And since this was an island, these were found on an island, I guess you can understand why they would probably include boats and waves in the ocean in their artwork, because those are probably some pretty big deals to these guys. Now, at first, people didn't know what these things were used for, and if, like I said, they're sort of decorative on this side. When we turn them over, there's a little small lip in sort of a circle shape on the other side, almost like a frying pan where you could maybe put something in it and cook, although I don't think these were ever used to cook anything. A lot of people speculate that these were probably used instead as mirrors. You could pour water into that sort of pan, and since it had a dark color, it was glazed in this kind of dark color, you could see a reflection in the pan itself. And so they think that this was kind of like a handheld mirror, and that's why you find them in a lot of the places they excavated, and found so many of them, because they were just a household object, something that a lot of people used. And they were highly decorative. We don't know if all of them were, most of them that we've seen have some great decorations. So we think that it was maybe not ceremonial like the Palette of Narmer in Egypt, but this is something that was used maybe by the wealthy on a daily basis. I also wanted to get into the island of Crete, and of course the city of Knossos. Now, when we look at that, this is where the King Minos is said to be from. If we read some of this ancient Greek mythology, we might hear the story of King Minos, and I'll get into that a little while later. But in this, we don't really have a formal language. We can't find anything in their formal language. We don't have a lot. Not a lot is known of the religious practices, although we will get into what we do know about it. And we do find a vast palace complex here on the island, and they call it the city of Knossos, or the Palace of Knossos. And it is about, well, let's check it out. Let's check it out here. Now, this is the remains of Knossos right now. Here is an aerial view, and you can see the aerial view. You can see that it's a pretty big structure. It's pretty fast. There were other palaces that this was built on top of, and so we wonder, okay, well, why did they keep building the same temple on top of old temples over and over and over again? Was there something significant about this location? Whether maybe it was significant religiously, or perhaps it was significant strategically. Maybe it was high on a hill and it was just a good location to have a palace, and that's why they kept building there. When we look at it, we do see all sorts of these little rooms, all the kind of winding rooms and stuff just from this, and we can kind of see where these guys might have got the idea later on, where the Greeks might have got the idea for the Minotaur from this area. Now, King Minos, like I said, was one of their main kings. The Minotaur is a kind of a combination of Minos and Taurus, and so we see Mino and Tor. And once again, people have called this building the labyrinth, or they think that there was a labyrinth underneath this palace, according to legend. And we'll get into that here in a second. I'm going to tell you the story of it. But this is a sort of what a recreation of it might have looked like. So this vast kind of palace location. And I also wanted to talk about this double axe here. It's called a labrys. We find a lot of these labrises around on the island. It is a double axe, an axe with double blades, and double blades actually on each side in this case. Now, a labrys was a lot of the times found and associated with women. We see a lot of what we think might have been female priests' graves where they were buried with these, and then we see drawings and images of this double axe all over the place. Now, the labrys, that is where the name the labyrinth kind of comes from. It's from this double axe, because they called that palace the place of the double axe, because that is where we find all of these images of the labyrinth. Of the labrys, scrawled onto the walls and everything else. And so that is what, where it gets its...
Far beneath the palace of the treacherous King Minos, in the damp darkness of an inescapable labyrinth, a horrific beast stalks the endless corridors of its prison, enraged with a bloodlust so intense that its deafening roar shakes the earth. It is easy to see why the Minotaur myth has a long history of being disregarded as pure fiction. However, there's a good chance that the Minotaur and other monsters and gods were created by our early ancestors to rationalize the terrifying things that they saw in the natural world, but did not understand. And while we can't explain every aspect of their stories, there may be some actual science that reveals itself when we dissect them for clues. So, as far as we know, there have never been human-bull hybrids. But the earliest material written about the Minotaur doesn't even mention its physical form. So that's probably not the key part of the story. What the different tellings do agree upon, however, is that the beast lives underground, and when it bellows, it causes tremendous problems. The various myths are also specific in stating that genius inventor Daedalus carved out the labyrinth beneath the island of Crete. Archaeological attempts to find the fabled maze have come up empty-handed, but Crete itself has yielded the most valuable clue of all, in the form of seismic activity. Crete sits on a piece of continental crust called the Aegean block, and has a bit of oceanic crust known as the Nubian block sliding right beneath it. This sort of geologic feature, called a subduction zone, is common all over the world and results in lots of earthquakes. However, in Crete, the situation is particularly volatile, as the Nubian block is attached to the massive buoyant continental crust that is Africa. When the Nubian block moves, it does not go down nearly as easily or as steeply as oceanic crust does in most other subduction zones. Instead, it violently and abruptly forces sections of the Mediterranean upwards in an event called uplift, and Crete is in uplift central. In the year 2014, Crete had more than 1,300 earthquakes of magnitude 2.0 or higher. By comparison, in the same period of time, Southern California, a much larger area, experienced a mere 255 earthquakes. Of course, we don't have detailed seismic records from the days of King Minos, but we do know from fossil records and geologic evidence that Crete has experienced serious uplift events that sometimes exceeded 30 feet in a single moment. Contrast this for a moment with the island of Hawaii, where earthquakes and volcanic activity were tightly woven to legends surrounding Pele, a goddess both fiery and fair. Like the Minotaur, her myths included tales of destruction, but they also contained elements of dance and creation. So why did Hawaii end up with Pele and Crete end up with the Minotaur? The difference likely comes down to the lava that followed many of Hawaii's worst earthquakes. The lava on Hawaii is made of basalt, which once cooled is highly fertile. Within a couple of decades of terrible eruptions, islanders would have seen vibrant green life thriving on new peninsulas made of lava. So it makes sense that their mythology captured this by portraying Pele as a creator as well as a destroyer. As for the people of Crete, their earthquakes brought only destruction and barren lands. So perhaps, for them, the unnatural and deadly Minotaur was born. The connections between mythical stories and the geology of the regions where they originated teach us that mythology and science are actually two sides of the same coin. Both are rooted in explaining and understanding the world. The key difference is that where mythology uses gods, monsters, and magic, science uses measurements, records, and experiments.